But I want to turn now to our latest big investigation that Karen Drew has been working on. Families have come to her and said Gethsemane Cemetery on Detroit's east side not only took their money, they did some pretty terrible things. They buried their loved ones together with people that they didn't know. They lost their loved ones' bodies or their headstones. Take a look at the first part of her investigation, and then she's going to join me.
We need justice. The dead do matter.
Michelle DeBerry and her daughter say they're sick with grief.
He's supposed to be here. He's supposed to be buried in here.
Michelle's husband, Elvis DeBerry, died more than 3 years ago.
Now there's no trace of him at all.
Yes, just disappeared. Please, I want him to rest in peace. That man did so much for us. And I want the cemetery to own up to what y'all did wrong.
When our Local 4 investigative team showed up with her family recently to help find him, the cemetery kicked us out.
City-owned property.
Yeah, the city don't want y'all on the ground.
The City of Detroit's General Services Department, located inside this building, oversees Gethsemane Cemetery. We asked for an interview. No one was willing to talk on camera. Instead, they asked for a list of questions they would address at a later date. I'll get to that in a moment, but first I'll tell you, the families, they had plenty to say to us.
Mothers, fathers, grandparents, and children all buried at Gethsemane Cemetery. Their families spoke with our Local 4 investigative team, and all 25 families said they weren't sure their loved ones were actually buried where the cemetery said they were. A mother told us her son's grave was one place, his headstone was moved somewhere else. Another woman said her grandparents' headstones had been moved multiple times. And a man whose parents were buried at Gethsemane decades ago said their grave sites just vanished.
Almost all of the 25 families we spoke to told us there was one specific thing the cemetery would not let them do: watch as they buried their loved one.
So you don't see them actually putting your loved one in the ground.
It struck Shelley Calvert as strange that Gethsemane Cemetery wouldn't let her family watch as her mother was buried.
Did they say why?
That's just not their policy.
And weeks later, when Shelley went to the cemetery to visit her mom's gravesite, what she saw horrified her.
I took pictures.
A huge expanse of freshly dug up dirt, broken pieces of headstones, and grave markers just carelessly lying in the dirt. Grave markers are metal spikes cemeteries put in the ground when a body is buried to identify exactly who is buried and where. Shelley found them like this. She couldn't find her mother's grave marker.
And I had a really bad panic attack that day.
After complaining to cemetery management, Shelley says the next time she visited, her mother's grave marker had reappeared, but in a different place from where it was originally.
We've had hundreds of telephone calls.
A few years ago, attorney Mark Rossman started hearing about all the problems at Gethsemane Cemetery.
Bodies that couldn't be located from time to time.
Rossman filed a class action lawsuit in 2021 against the city of Detroit, which owns the cemetery, and several cemetery management companies the city contracted with over the years. Rossman got a close-up look at how the cemetery was managed.
We found that it was a complete disaster. There were outdated maps, outdated files.
Immediately after his class action lawsuit was filed in court, several of the city's cemetery management companies declared bankruptcy, which got them off the hook. And then a Wayne County judge, Sheila Gibson, gave the city immunity. So Gethsemane families can't sue the city, and again, the city owns the cemetery.
No problem with taking our money, and then you don't want to take accountability and responsibility for the actions that were done. That's not fair to us and our family members, and it's definitely not fair to my mother.
The family's pain, it hasn't gone away, it hasn't moved on, but I can tell you who has moved on. Some city employees who actually oversaw Gethsemane Cemetery were promoted and moved on up inside the city-county building.
All right, so Karen's with me now. I mean, I think when you take a deep breath and you hear from those families, the disrespect of not being able to know where their loved ones are after painful losing someone is a lot.
It is a lot. You go there to find a little bit of peace, a little bit of closure, and family after family is going there either not finding the grave, trying to ask questions, no one answers them, or when they do think they find the grave, those markers that we were talking about, they've moved, they're over here, and you know, like, you didn't dig up the body, so why did the marker move?
Yeah.
And so it's really upsetting, and when we did this story, we knew, you know, there was an issue years and years ago, but we thought things were a little bit better organized, and they're not. And then more and more people are calling with horror stories.
Oh my gosh, I bet when you put that out there and people are like, oh no, this has happened to me too. So a little complicated about who actually owns the cemetery and who runs the cemetery.
So the city of Detroit has owned the cemetery now since 1987. That, you know, the land, they put it out for management, and different management companies have run it.
Right.
So there's accountability on both sides. One, obviously if you're a management company, you should do your job and manage. Two, if you are the city, there are a lot of families that depended on this as an affordable way to bury their loved one. So you need some responsibility, you need some accountability. So we needed to track down people who are managing, track down the city, and then also see where the money's going.
Yeah. What surprised you about this?
Really,
because I know you see a lot, you know. I mean, not much surprises you, but I mean, when you see this.
You know, just as a human being, what do they say? You know, you can tell a society how they treat their, you know, they're very young
and they're elderly.
Yeah, and we've just totally disrespected these families for generation after generation. And then you think, okay, now we're exposing it. Someone's going to get upset. And I was surprised that really no lawmakers, no city council people, no one's raising their hand, going, okay, we get that there's an issue. What can we do now? Because this needs to be fixed. You can't just let this be. It's a hot mess.
So the second story is really now following the money? Is that
Seeing exactly how it was managed, who was paid, and kind of what's next.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at that one.
And you can see that the headstones are like cluttered, sitting on top of each other, overlapping each other.
When Yolanda Baldwin and Madison Reed visited Gethsemane Cemetery, they were stunned by how crowded it seemed.
Even though it's full, we're going to keep selling, keep selling, keep selling.
A 2021 Detroit police investigation of Gethsemane Cemetery found multiple bodies in locations different from where the above-ground markers indicated they would be. No one was charged with a crime.
Which is crazy to me.
Local 4 investigators obtained the city's contracts with cemetery management companies going all the way back to 1992. Over the years, 4 cemetery management companies kept roughly 90% of the profit from the sale of burials. One management company, ST Enterprises, was paid more than $470,000 by the city to manage city-owned cemeteries between 2013 and 2021. That's on top of what the company made selling burials. In an email to Local 4, the city said it does not operate Gethsemane or the other 2 cemeteries or make any money from them. The private contractors do this. And take a look at this. To make room for more and more burials, the city and ST Enterprises agreed to turn a cemetery road into even more grave sites.
You knew that it was overcrowded, and they should have been stopped letting people come there.
Shelley Calvert documented a mess at the cemetery when she went to visit her mother's gravesite. And like many families we heard from, her complaints to cemetery management were ignored. In response to our questions about several gravesites, the city insisted in an email that there is no evidence of a headstone purchase for 2 graves with missing headstones. But take a look at this. There are receipts for those headstones from 1976. Family members shared with us the paperwork. Also, the city said a gravesite marker for Elvis DeBerry had been in place since he was buried 3 years ago. But his family's been searching that location all that time and couldn't find it.
The dead do matter, and I wish they understand that. It hurts.
The city reminded the Local 4 investigators that every lawsuit filed against the city regarding these types of concerns has been dismissed.
So they won't be held accountable for the wrongdoing that happened at their property. It's so unfair. It's so unfair.
All right, Karen, so if the city can't be held accountable on this one, what's next in this?
I mean, you want to continue to pursue the city in the terms of the ethical responsibility. Okay. I mean, fine, you don't win a lawsuit. But I mean, seriously, are we literally putting bodies on top of bodies that we don't know belong together? I had someone who worked at the cemetery, an insider, who said that is what was occurring. And we do need to fix this because people do need to have that respect. We do need to track down some city council folks and say, okay, what are we going to do now to prevent this? Because now I'm getting word, you know, and some concerns I'm not going to name right now, but other cemeteries have been doing this to other families. We were mentioning in the newsroom too, I feel like there is that lack of accountability and respect because maybe these families may not have as much money. They didn't do the quote fancy funeral, and so we can take advantage, and you can't take advantage. It's just wrong.
No,
so
absolutely not. So I think this is also the power of being able to do an investigation where people come to you and say, hey, you need to really look into this, and then it grows from there because you get more people coming that leads you in another direction too.
Yeah, this morning I got an email from a family member who said, hey Karen, I noticed you showed that video of that street gone. Well, so now the street's gone and you buried. Well, guess what? Now I can't get to my mom. She's over by the fence because you were so concerned about burying more people. Now I can't.
They took out the road.
I can't drive my car. I can't physically walk. So what does that do to me? So we have to fix this. We have to take a look at, and we also have to prevent this from happening. So yes, I've got a lot of emails. I'm checking into them. I'm making calls, and we're going to try to see what we can do to help families at least track down their loved ones.
Absolutely. Email address again, you want to give out?
kdrew@wdiv.com.
All right, she goes through all of them, so she'll get back to you.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
good stuff.
you. I appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Karen. All right.